This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you.
So again, on behalf of the U.S. Lighthouse Society, welcome everybody. Nice to have you back. A lot of familiar faces and some new ones. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. I'm the historian for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. And pardon me if I keep looking out of the corners of my eyes here, because I'm just letting people in from the waiting room. But I'm the historian for the U.S. Lighthouse Society and the host of the Society's podcast, Lighthearted. Weekly podcast, and it's a pleasure to be doing another one of these Zoom events. We've done quite a few of them in recent years. We kind of started them during COVID, like a lot of people started doing things like this at that time, and it just it turned out to be a really nice way to share events like this with people all over the country, and to be able to bring in guests from all over the country, all over the world, really. So it's a really nice way of having these virtual events. Today's event, as I mentioned a minute ago, is being recorded, and it will be on the USLHS YouTube channel and the website at uslhs.org within a couple of days. So today we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of Fairweather Island Lighthouse in Bridgeport, Connecticut, aka Black Rock Harbor Lighthouse. And we have two people who have played a large role in preserving that lighthouse and other local history, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. We're also going to see a video with the author of a children's book about Fairweather Island's most famous keeper. We're going to open it up for questions near the end of the event. After Phil and Bruce give their presentation, we're going to open up for questions. You can ask questions in the chat. Or you can digitally, virtually raise your hands. We'll tell you how to do that, and we'll call on you. As you're going to hear, Black Rock Harbor and the lighthouse have a lot of really interesting history. I have some personal history with the lighthouse going back to the 90s. So here are three pictures from my first visit to Fairweather Island Lighthouse, circa 1990s, towards the end of the 90s, but I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to say 96-ish. That might not be quite right. Actually, it says, does it say 97 or does it say 87? I think it says 97 on the lighthouse, some of the graffiti there. So it was probably about 97 that I was there. And you see, it didn't look so good inside and out. The inside was a scene of, I think, beer parties and stuff like that at that time. I can tell you it looks a million times better now. And our guests are going to tell you all about that, how and why it looks better. So we'll get to that in just a moment. And okay. As I said, the lighthouse has a lot of interesting history, including, of course, one of the most interesting lighthouse keepers in American history, Kate Moore. I think just a really, really fascinating person. I thought I'd give a few basic facts about Bridgeport. First of all, Bridgeport is about 60 miles northeast of Manhattan. Its population of about 146,000 makes it the largest city in Connecticut and the fifth largest in New England. The famous showman P.T. Barnum was a Connecticut native, and he served as mayor of Bridgeport in 1875 and 76. Bridgeport is the birthplace of the Subway restaurant chain, so that's a pretty big claim to fame. And Bridgeport is the birthplace of the Frisbee Pie Company, and the Frisbee Flying Disc. So I think that's really cool. Those are two big parts of our culture: Subway restaurants and the Frisbee Flying Disc. And I want to make it clear that Black Rock Harbor, where the lighthouse is separate from Bridgeport Harbor. They are two separate harbors, and I know our guests are going to tell a bit about the history of Black Rock Harbor, which has a very long and rich history. So let me introduce our guests. We have two guests, and Bruce Williams. You see, if you can probably all see them in the box there. Bruce is on the right. The box at the bottom is identified as Phil, but Bruce is on the right. They're on Phil's account. They're together there. So you're only seeing Phil's name on the screen, but Bruce is on the right. And Bruce Williams is the vice president of Captain's Cove Seaport, a family-owned business in Bridgeport that includes a marina, restaurant, bar, fishing charters, and more. Bruce is also a historian of the local area and co-author of the book Bridgeport on the Sound, published in 2001. And also with us is Phil Blodgess, who is a past president of the Black Rock Community Council and chair of the Black Rock Community Council History Program. He's also the chair of the 200th anniversary program for the Lighthouse. 2019 was a really big year for Black Rock Harbor. It was the 375th anniversary of the beginning of the Black Rock community. And again, of course, this year is the 200th anniversary of the lighthouse tower that stands there today on Fairweather Island. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and Phil. I think Phil wants to say a little bit before we go into the presentation they're going to give. And I'm actually going to be sharing my screen in a moment here. So I don't know if that matters to anybody, but at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy, and welcome everyone. Glad you're with us this afternoon. I just want to do a quick acknowledgement that this is the first of 4 events we're running this month in celebration of the bicentennial Fair of the Lighthouse. Next Saturday, we're planning on having fireworks over the lighthouse with a boat parade coming down the harbor. After that, we have a social event at a local yacht club to celebrate the bicentennial. And then we have Bruce and I are going to do a live presentation at the downtown library here in Bridgeport. So to all those people, and especially the organizations along the harbor, there are 5 of them. There are 2 yacht clubs, Fairweather and Black Rock Yacht Club. There's Captain's Cove Seaport, which Bruce is the vice president of. There's the Northern Club, and the Port 5 Naval Veterans have been instrumental in helping us run all of these events. So just for the local people who happen to be tuning in, just a shout out to thanks to the people and the organizations that have made this program possible. All right, so Bruce and I have done this before live at various locations in the area. This is the first time we've done this via Zoom, so it's certainly different for us. But typically, I've told the audiences that I do the play-by-play and Bruce does the color. So he's our color analyst. He's got a lot of background stories and the history of some of the people and events that we'll be talking about. So it is about the past. So there's the first section of this presentation will just run you through the general history of this lighthouse, and it's about the present. So we'll look at the most recent restoration. Unfortunately, the door and the inside of the lighthouse don't look all that different from what Jeremy showed you in 1997, which you'll see in this presentation. And we'll talk about that. And then the future of this lighthouse and the challenges we face. So here we go, Jeremy, let it run. That's just our logo that we developed early on in the year. We put this on 100 street banners that still line the streets in Black Rock.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those of you that are from far away, of which many of you would be, that's where we are. We're just a little bit west of New Haven and just a little bit east of New York City, butting up to Fairfield, Connecticut. The map or the aerial picture below shows where the lighthouse is, and the water to the left that you see is Black Rock Harbor. And then the water in the upper right of that picture is Bridgeport Harbor. So we don't want to confuse the two. Bridgeport Harbor is, basically took over as the commercial harbor for Bridgeport. And there is whoops, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I advanced by accident because I realized that when I click to admit somebody, I'm also clicking the presentation. So that might get a little.
That's all right. That was a good time to fade.
Okay.
So there's a shot of the lighthouse. If you look like dead center, all the way out at the end, there is the lighthouse. The green space that you see in the foreground is Seaside Park. And there's a parking area and a beautiful beach right there on the left side of that picture, kind of almost above that green space, I guess I would say. But that little winding breakwater that heads out to the land out there brings you to the lighthouse. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that it is not easy to get to. This is not a lighthouse, if you plan on visiting, that you can drive up and get out of your car and check it out. The only way to this lighthouse really is by walking across that breakwater, which due to recent storms has become very, very challenging. And it's, you know, it's not a huge distance. I think it's a half a mile, maybe from the beginning to the end. Not all of it's on that breakwater. But that's the only way you're going to get there. If you want to come in by boat, you can do it, but you better have a flat bottom and figure the tide to be right. There's no docking facilities out at the lighthouse. So what that does is it creates a situation where the lighthouse sits all alone, unprotected. Not just from the elements, you know, all lighthouses have that issue, but our lighthouse is unprotected from human beings. And so we can't prevent, and we haven't been able to prevent vandals from doing, you know, significant damage to this lighthouse, which we'll see later on in the presentation. So we can go forward, Jeremy. And there it is, sitting all alone out at the end of that strip that you just saw. That's Long Island going, like if you go straight behind that lighthouse, that's Long Island Sound. And if you can kind of see the land in the background there, that is Long Island, isn't it? We're not looking
17 miles away.
17 miles away is Long Island, New York. So we're kind of right across from Port Jefferson, New York. So it doesn't take an awful long time to take a boat over to Long Island from where we are. All right, so we'll go on and see what, there's just an up close view of it. It looks really good in that picture. That was, I'm not sure exactly when that was taken. And then we'll look at some of the structural characteristics, which a lot of this is not unique to Fairweather Lighthouse, especially when we look at the lighting as we go to the next. This is the systems that were used pretty much across the board. Of course, there weren't that many lighthouses at the time this lighthouse was first built. Jeremy and I talked about this earlier this year, and I think we can safely say that Fairweather Lighthouse today is among the 20 oldest lighthouses in the United States. So, you know, you're talking 1808, 1830, it really weren't a lot of lighthouses around, but these whale oil spider lamps were used. Whaling was a huge industry around here. We're close to New London. We're close to New Bedford, Nantucket. So the oil was plentiful and available. So they used that as the fuel for illumination. And then they went to this argon, which really was the Lewis lamp in the United States, adding this Fresnel lens in the 1850s, which we'll look at. In 1933, it was decommissioned. And from 1933 to the present, it sits as a historic structure. We've added lighting in recent years, which we'll look at, and that lighting is solar. It was never electrified, our lighthouse, never. 1808, by the way, marks the first year a lighthouse was built there, but it was a wooden structure, and that would have been authorized by President Thomas Jefferson at that point. But obviously, the fact that the President Adams and what they were deeply involved in all these original lighthouses because they were so important to navigation, so important to commerce. So we actually started our lighthouse story starts in 1808 with a wooden lighthouse being built. But it didn't last a storm in 1821 and blew down as a result of a very severe hurricane. So our lighthouse that you see today was rebuilt, and it's a stone lighthouse, as you can see, and as we'll kind of walk through. And that was built in 1823, which is why we are celebrating today the 200th anniversary. We're good, Jeremy. And these are just the lights that I mentioned. That spider or pan lamp is the most, you know, it's the most basic of the lamps. It's literally a pan with candles in it, with wicks. It's not efficient. It doesn't burn cleanly. It leaves a lot of soot in the lighthouse, and it doesn't do an effective job of illuminating the lantern and providing aid to the navigators. So the next advancement was this argon lamp, which was much more clean in its burning. It was a better flame, and it was cleaner. It was more efficient, I should say. So all of the American lighthouses from 1812 to 1840 basically use this. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that if you add a reflector behind it, which would have been metal, and a lens in front of it, you are able to produce a pretty good illumination. Not great, but pretty good. Much better than a spider lamp that preceded, or the pan lamps that preceded this. So our lighthouse would have had something like this set up in its lantern. And we'll go on. And then in the 1850s, the United States started to implement this lens that had been developed 30 years earlier in Europe. But because I think principally of the expense, we didn't adopt it, but it's a much, much, much more effective way of producing illumination for mariners. And some of the lighthouses in the United States still have this today. The one on the left is a 5th order Fresnel lens. That's among the biggest. It's 8 feet high. You can see it consists of a whole bunch of prisms, and there's physics here that I'll never understand. But because of the nature of the way this is constructed and developed, it really shines the light much brighter and much farther into the water. The one on the right is what Black Rock had. Fair the Lighthouse is a 5th order, much, much smaller lens, 1.7 feet high, but still a much bigger, a much needed improvement over the argon lamp. This lens, unfortunately, had our lens, I should say, that was at Fair the Lighthouse, has been lost to history. So we don't know, and we'll probably never know its whereabouts. So that was the illumination part of it. As far as the lantern itself, it's not big. There's not a lot of space up there. I put airflow system because airflow is incredibly important in the illumination part, so you didn't have a whole lot of soot just building up in this room. You had to ventilate it. So you can see the top is ventilated, and if you look in the left-hand picture there, those are part of the solar operation that we have in there today, but there's little round holes that would have also allowed for air to flow in and out, and the lighthouse keeper would regulate the air by adjusting the vents inside the lantern room. All right, so that's the lighting and that's the lantern. That's a picture of the lighthouse with the oil house next to it, which again was lost to history, unfortunately, and no longer exists. I think we may show you the base of it that we still have, but it was torn down, Bruce, I think by city people or something, or I don't.
Well, back in the 70s, it was a small, as you can see, a small brick building. And as Phil mentioned before, the lighthouse and the oil house at that time were susceptible to people walking out and doing damage, and they actually physically, for whatever reason, demolished a small building there on the to the right of the light, which was always part of the appearance of the light back in the 50s and 60s. It was the lighthouse and the little house next to it, but unfortunately nothing left but the base of that.
Yeah, when Sandy came through, it did expose the base of it. It had been covered by sand for, since probably the 70s or the 80s. Okay. And this is, they took this from the Mary Louise Clifford and Candace, and that's a mother-daughter combination who wrote a couple books that I have. This is from Women Who Kept the Lights. And I think it shows kind of what our woman lighthouse keeper would have looked like. It's a different lantern room. This is looks to be much bigger than ours. But from Kate Moore, who was our lighthouse keeper for, 60 years anyway, in the 19th century, she told the New York World it was a miserable one to keep going. It consisted of 8 oil lamps, which took 4 gallons of oil every night. They're not replenished at started intervals all through the night. They went out, and during very windy nights, it was almost impossible to keep them burning. And so she stayed there all night. I have no idea where she would have stayed in that small lantern room that you saw, but I guess she found some space in there to spend the night, because if she didn't do that, she would have had to been back and forth and up the stairs to get to the lantern to relight the lamps. So on those windy nights, she tells us that she spent the night. So if we move on to the next, and that's just a bucket I put in here, which is they used, and for the life of me, I still don't understand why they didn't develop a pulley system to pull these buckets of oil up to the top. But from what we know, they carried them up the stairs to get to the top to get to the lantern. And that's a 19th century oil bucket. And this is the inside of the lighthouse. You can see that it's rubble stone on the right. On the left, the outside is cut brownstone, so it has a smooth surface. We'll look at the top in a second where there's corbelled brick and the cast iron lantern on top. One other thing that's been lost, in addition to our Fresnel lens and in addition to the oil house, the staircase going to the top of the lighthouse is lost to history. Our best guess is it burned down, that the vandals just set it on fire. Because there's no other explanation for why why the stairs are missing. So there is no way to get to the top of this lighthouse without putting a ladder up against the side. Or scaffolding, as we'll see. So there is the kind of the breakdown of what we have. It's a cast iron roof. It's a acrylic glass now that we've had replaced. The masonry drum sits below the lantern. That lower base here is corbelled brick, and it sits all on a concrete slab. And I pointed out the solar panel, which now provides the lighting. And we'll look at that a little more closely in a minute or so. All right, so the past, 1808 to 1933. At some point, you got to do some color commentary.
This is my time coming up.
It's good. So Black Rock Harbor, historically important. And along the entire Connecticut coastline, there's only two deepwater harbors. It was Black Rock and New London. So it was recognized from the very beginning as a very important commercial center, and it played that role. It played a hugely important trade role leading up to the American Revolution, and then a whole lot of privateering and spying came out of Black Rock Harbor during the American Revolution. Some of you may have been familiar or may be familiar with the Culper Spy Ring that operated between Long Island and Black Rock. Black Rock was the base here in Connecticut for receiving the messages that were going to be eventually delivered to General Washington. And that spy ring has been credited with turning the tide of that war by some. So we played an incredibly important historical role. Trade resumed after the war, and we really had quite a few good years, all the way up to the War of 1812.
The Black Rock Harbor, the main attraction when the settlers first arrived in the mid 1600s was the depth of the harbor. Nowadays, harbors can be dredged, but in those days they had to find harbors that were naturally deep. So the two deepest harbors in Connecticut at that time when it first came were New London and Black Rock. So that's what attracted the settlers in the first place to develop this harbor as a seaport. It also had the advantage of the island where the lighthouse sits. So that kind of protected vessels that were moored in the harbor, relatively so. It's still open to winds from certain directions, but for the most part, it provided kind of a shelter. And also the harbor is fairly wide, several hundred yards at some of its widest points. So when vessels were under sail, of course, they could tack back and forth in the harbor. And that was, those are the three key elements that the reason that the settlers chose Black Rock over some other harbors along the coast.
And it was why it was recognized in 1808 by the Jefferson administration as a place to put a lighthouse. We can move on, Jeremy. Okay, and then as far as the Black Rock Harbor Light, and we go back and forth, Fairweather Lighthouse is what it has come to be known, but officially it is Black Rock Harbor Light. It was purchased from Daniel Fairweather by the federal government, hence the name Fairweather Island, hence the name Fairweather Lighthouse. Congress appropriated the money in 1807, and the first lighthouse was built maybe 1807, 1808. It was wood, octagonal, and about 40 feet high. So about the same height as the current lighthouse, but it was made of wood. Destroyed by a tremendous storm, and in 1822, Congress authorizes the lighthouse, which we see today, and it was decommissioned in 1933.
That storm in 1821 was thought to be the worst hurricane that ever hit this area, probably worse than Irene and Sandy, as we recently experienced. Most of Brooklyn was underwater, and the lighthouse, the wooden lighthouse that Phil talked about, was found up in the town of Fairfield, several blocks in by what is now the Old Post Road.
And then we have the lighthouse keepers. And you see there weren't that many over 100 and whatever that is, 10, 15, 20-year period. But lighthouse keeping jobs were coveted. They were government jobs. There weren't many government jobs at that point. And I think once people got them, they kept them. And in the case of our lighthouse, it was the Moore family, in particular Kate Moore, who really defined the history of Fairweather Lighthouse. So her father was appointed, Stephen T. Moore, you see the third person on the list, in 1817, but he really became incapacitated early on.
Right, it's really kind of interesting to see how they got their appointments, because usually it was because they knew somebody or had some connection to the government. Stephen Moore worked on the farm of Isaac Hull. Isaac Hull was the naval hero, kind of the nation's national naval hero who defeated the Guerriere in the Constitution in the War of 1812. And in his off time, he had a farm up in Derby, Connecticut, just a little north of here. And Stephen Moore was working on this farm, and this is related by his daughter Kate, and he was in an upper floor taking some hay up or something, and fell out and was injured. And through his connections with Isaac Hull, was appointed to be keeper.
But he apparently became incapacitated early on, and Kate Moore said she began pretty much assuming the duties at the age of 12. But the father may have been incapacitated, but it didn't keep him from living a long life. So he maintained a presence there on the island, but Kate Moore, by all accounts, was the keeper, just not the official lighthouse keeper. And she did not get that official appointment from the United States government until 1871. And then in 1880, she retires. She moves back to the shore here in Black Rock and passes away some years later. So if you look at the history of this lighthouse from 1817 to 1880, which is a span of 63 years, it was the Moore family, and particularly Kate Moore. And there she is. And unfortunately, that is the only picture we have of Kate Moore. At least the only picture that I've ever seen. And she retired in 1880 at the age of 68 and was asked about the 21 lives she was credited with saving. And she said, I wish it had been double that number. She was a salty woman for sure. There are certainly some stories that were written in newspapers after her service and when she only gave one interview, and that's the New York World, but there were accounts in local newspapers about her life after the lighthouse keeping duty was over. And she definitely was a tough woman.
Yeah, she, as Phil said, her father died in 1871. And she actually, in an article that I found recently, she buried him on the island and then collected his pay for a little while from the government before she told the government that he had passed away. And then eventually she was officially appointed. But she was an amazing woman who maintained oyster beds in the harbor, did all these rescues over her career. She was of all the keepers in the Sound, I think she's certainly, as a woman, she's the most well known.
And she was well read. She supposedly had built a pretty impressive library by the time she retired. But she was tough. She claims that if somebody came onto that island that didn't belong there, she would show up with her gun in hand, her rifle in hand, pointed at them and tell them, I represent the United States government and you need to get off this land.
Her appointment came through, her official appointment came through her cousins. She was from a wealthy family originally, and two of her cousins were in Washington. One married William Belknap, who was in Grant's administration, and then she passed away, and the second cousin married him after that. So through that connection to Belknap, she got her appointment. So once again, all these keepers seem to have some connection that got them the official appointments.
And so we'll move on to, so that's just a chronology, born in 1812, 1871, Stephen Moore dies, named lighthouse keeper, retires, and we have her dying in 87. You know, that's the best we can do. It's really hard to get exact records on her birth time and her birth date and death. And I'm not even sure they put it on her gravestone but we'll look at that. But that's the best chronology we could come up with. And actually Anna Redding, who we'll introduce in a little bit, I think she did the research that got us to these dates. All right. This is from the local newspaper in 1860, and it basically describes two people from Black Rock who went capsized in the Sound on a Wednesday night in 1860. And their calls for help were heard by the keeper of the light, Miss Moore, who immediately set out with 2 men in a boat to afford them relief. The night was dark, but they followed the sound of their voices, and they found them about 2 miles from shore, clinging to the boat. One of them was easily rescued from his perilous situation, but the other not so much was so much exhausted as to be entirely helpless, and was with difficulty taken from the water. Thus were the unfortunate men luckily saved from a watery and untimely grave. And it just, I thought, characterizes in a pretty graphic way, for lack of a better term, the kind of work that Kate Moore did. You know, it really was dangerous, incredibly challenging. And the fact that she actually saved 21 lives, and I think it was more than that, is extremely commendable for anyone to do at this time in history. This is the logbook, and those of you that are lighthouse people, you know how tedious these books can be and how detailed they are. But one of the lighthouse keeper's duties was to write a daily log of what was going on, and mostly these entries identify the weather and the wind direction. Some of them are more telling in terms of boats that came and went or repairs that were done. I suspect if we went through, and I've sat with these journals and spent some time and read every single line, we'd probably be able to get more history out of this that's meaningful. But it's a really difficult task because there's so many entries.
Kate Moore's, as you see this page here, she's kind of just the facts, you know, the wind direction, sea height, and things like that. As you get into the keeper that succeeded her, Leonard Clark, he's a little more talks a little more about everyday kind of things. So it's different styles, but her style was very cut and dry.
And there's just a look so you can see where the lighthouse was, and if you follow that little trail that's kind of outlined there with the parallel lines, that goes all the way to the lighthouse keeper's house, and there's a couple 100 yards apart, and there's a marshy area there that they had to go through to get from the house to the lighthouse. I've been to a lot of lighthouses where the lighthouse keeper's house is right next to the lighthouse, or even better, part of the lighthouse. And so the maintenance of the lantern during this time for those keepers was far less challenging than what the lighthouse keepers had to deal with here on Fairweather Island. That is why Kate Moore, as we said in one of the earlier slides, would spend the night at the lighthouse if the night were so windy and the conditions so poor that the lantern kept going out. But that's where they put it. I think they basically chose that location because the area around where that lighthouse is all marshy and not suitable for putting a building on, other than the lighthouse that they were able to put on this riprap. And then that's just the remains of the lighthouse keeper's house. And guess what? We've also lost the lighthouse keeper's house here in Black Rock. So the only thing we have left from that period is the lighthouse itself. And then she just describes about the windy nights, impossible to keep the lamps burning. I slept at home, she said, dressed in a suit of boys' clothes. This is Kate Moore's words. My lighted lantern hanging at my headboard, and my face turned so that I could see shining on the wall the light from the tower and know if anything happened to it. Our house was over 600 feet from the lighthouse, and to reach it, I had to walk across 2 planks, under which on stormy nights were 4 feet of water. And it was not too easy to stay on those slippery wet boards with the wind whirling and the spray blinding me. So there's a current day shot of what we're talking about. The arrow at the bottom there shows you where the base of the lighthouse is, and the other arrow shows you where the lighthouse keeper's house was, in that little thicket of trees. And you can see that the train that needed to be crossed here is marshy, and therefore, I'm sure Kate's words were quite accurate about the treacherous nature of the journey some of those evenings. And that's just another, that's a map of an aerial view. That's a photo.
This was taken back in 1919. A kind of an amateur photographer went up in a biplane and took these amazing photos of Black Rock and also Bridgeport and the Lake Submarine Works in Bridgeport Harbor, and really kind of neat photos. And this shows the harbor before the landfill filled in that whole area in the lower part of the picture. But you can still see at the very top left the island, which is pretty much the same. And then the breakwater leading back, and then the causeway that was built out there. But this gives a pretty good idea of what the harbor looked like from this point, and then earlier than that. And this is Kate Moore's house, which burned down in, we believe, around 1912. This is where she moved when she retired from the light. The guy that lived in the center house there in the lower photo, Captain Fancher, did a really kind of interesting article in the 1920s. And he gave a lot of background history of Black Rock and Kate Moore in particular. And he said when she retired from being the lighthouse keeper, moved over to Black Rock, she was this elderly, weathered lady, and swore a lot, and became kind of the boogeyman for all the kids in Black Rock. So the parents would say, "Well, Kate Moore is going to get you if you're not good." But she lived there until, as we said, 1899, when she passed away.
And of those three buildings in the bottom photograph, there only one still stands, and that's on the right, which is now Fair the Yacht Club. And that's a side note.
This is, as we get into the story of Kate Moore, it's just interesting to see all the people she touched and her relations and so on, and what they did. This is a painting by, it's a reproduction of a painting by Charles Day Hunt. And when Phil and I went over to the Mountain Grove Cemetery to arrange having a monument put up for Kate Moore, we're going to get to that in a little while. We found the burial plot map in the office there, and we found Kate Moore's grave and her sister Mary Moore's grave, and the grave of Charles Day Hunt. Now, Charles Day Hunt was a really prominent Hudson River School artist. His paintings are in the Brooklyn Museum and other museums across the country. And he was married to Mary, Kate's sister. Now, Mary Wachowski was the city historian for Bridgeport, the late Mary Wachowski. She passed away this past year. And look, she loved Kate Moore, and she loved telling the Kate Moore story. She wrote a lot of stuff that you see online, Kate's history and so on. And she said, there's some connection between Kate Moore and Nathaniel Hawthorne, but nobody ever knew what that connection was. But we actually found it because Charles Day Hunt was the brother-in-law, or the cousin of the Peabody sisters from Boston, Elizabeth Peabody, Mary, and Sophia Peabody, who were at the heart of the Transcendental movement in Boston. Sophia Peabody was married to Nathaniel Hawthorne. So that's kind of connection. So she kind of ran in these circles, which is really kind of fascinating. A lot of artists painted in Black Rock, the 19th century artists. some very well-known, Martin Johnson Head, Charles Day Hunt. So it's kind of fun. I collect paintings and go through the internet and try to find paintings that relate to Black Rock Harbor. We've found one recently done by Francis Augustus Silva, one of the most prominent Impressionist artists of that time.
And then the lighthouse keeper's house that no longer exists, that's not the original. I think that was built around 1870 or so. It's got some of that gingerbread Victorian look to it. And the lighthouse keeper from 1880 to 1906 and his wife, Leonard Clark.
Yeah, Leonard Clark was a Civil War veteran. He was wounded at the Battle of the Wilderness in the Civil War. And then after he got out of the Army, he became a whaling captain and was eventually took over as keeper of the light after Cape More. And if you look on his lap, he's holding a cane, which I guess relates to his war injury. And as I mentioned before, he was very talkative in his notes in the logbook. And I think he was kind of glad to scoop Cape More out of there because he kept saying, well, she came back today. And but they were he and his wife Mary kept, as you see there, 1880 to 1906, for quite a number of years. She took over in the last couple of years after he passed away, which is a common thing in lighthouses in our area and other areas. We see it in Fairweather Light, Penfield Light, at some point Light in Bridgeport, where the husband or the father would be incapacitated or pass away, and the wife would take over his duties.
And that is what Black Rock Harbor, we don't know who painted that, but that's a good depiction of what it would have looked like in that era.
This was, as it says there, circa 1889. And it's interesting because off on to the right behind the small sloop there, you can see the buildings on the island, the lighthouse, of course, on the end. And then there's a brown building, which was a boathouse, which is nobody's ever seen. That was probably lost around 1900. And then to the left of the small sloop is the white lighthouse keeper's cottage. What's interesting about paintings is you can see the colors of things, which in black and white photos of the era, you never get to understand what the colors of the houses or structures were. When we grew up, that house was always gray. So everybody figured, well, that house was always gray. But obviously, in its heyday, in 1889 and probably before, it was white, which made sense because it was more reflective. And from a distance, the white lighthouse and the white house would stand out to a sailor coming into the harbor.
So the honoring Cape More section, we'll work through pretty quickly, but there were three principal events that occurred, and they all occurred pretty much at the same time, even though we weren't aware of each other's efforts. But we started meeting our history group to do a memorial for Cape More here in Black Rock. We did not know that at the same time, the United States Coast Guard was planning on naming one of their new cutters after Cape More. They had a whole series of cutters that they were launching, and they were naming them after lighthouse heroes and heroines. Nor were we aware of this initiative that her marker at Mountain Grove Cemetery was finally going to get a gravestone. She was in an unmarked grave from the time she was buried in the 1880s until what you see here, May of 2014. You can see that under Kathleen A. Moore, it says C for circa because they weren't sure of the Coast Guard, and nor are we of the exact dates, but it's pretty good what they've shown, 1812 to 1899. They had a full Coast Guard ceremony at the cemetery that day, and then they launched the vessel, I think the next month, if you go to the next slide, Jeremy. And this is the U.S. May 10th of 2014. This is the U.S. CGC Kathleen Moore, which as we sit here today is patrolling the shores in the Caribbean. And if we continue on, they have done some pretty significant drug interdictions. Here you see a Coast Guard nabs 2 smugglers and seizes $7.5 million in cocaine. And that Coast Guard cutter was the Kathleen Moore. That's September of 2021. Now, we were planning on having our memorial the same year, but we just didn't get our acting gear, and I'll take the fall for that. So our planning dragged on, and then the next year, if we continue, we did get our acting gear. And in September of 2015, we had the official dedication and the unveiling of the Kate Moore Memorial here in Black Rock. And again, the Coast Guard was the principal driver. They kind of ran the program. The woman to the left there is Anna Redding, Anna Crowley Redding, which we'll look at in a few minutes. She recently published a book, a children's book on Kate Moore. And if we continue on, you'll see that we had an unveiling of kids from local schools. That is the memorial. The fire department was offshore shooting the water into the air. We had a cannon go off at the unveiling. The Coast Guard National Anthem was sung. It was quite an event, and everything seemed to work, which it usually doesn't when you're playing events like this. And the next and last slide, I think, is just a picture of the memorial today. So that is the Kate Moore Memorial that overlooks the lighthouse that she so well served for some 60 or so years.
It was amazing that the Coast Guard got so involved with us in this project. When they normally, Coast Guard traditionally names their vessels after plants, trees, the redwood, the eucalyptus. That's, for some reason, that's what they traditionally name their vessels after. But they were driving the head of Bulger Shipyards, and that's the company that built the Catherine Moore and all the ships in that class, was driving up to Cape Cod with the head of the Coast Guard at that time. And they were going to attend the funeral for Bernie Weber, who was a great Coast Guard hero. A major motion picture was actually came out some years ago about his efforts in that rescue off Cape Cod. And they were driving to his funeral, and they said, why don't we name the first boat in this class after Bernie Weber? So that's what got it going. And then so each vessel in the Sentinel class fleet, I think there's going to be eventually 20 or 30 of them, were named after heroes or heroines in the case of Kate Moore. And the Coast Guard and Bulger really invested themselves in this project. So when they would come to a town or a city where a Coast Guard hero was from, they would try to talk to his descendants, people that he or she may have saved. So it's really a wonderful program, and they did it with Kate Moore as well, even though she had no descendants. But it was just a wonderful process and great to be part of that whole thing.
Okay. All right. And then Courage Like Kate is the book I mentioned by Anna Crowley Redding. I think the next slide has the cover, but if you look at those illustrations, that's pretty darn good. That's Emily Sutton's work, who's a terrific illustrator. And she kind of depicted the island as she thought it would have appeared. Those two structures, that white building in the painting and that large building are shown in the illustration in the bottom left. Lantern is pretty accurate. I love the Kate Moore looking out of the lantern up at the sky. So it's a terrifically illustrated and a very well written children's book. I think the cover is in the next slide. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, I'm wrong. But you want to segue to Anna Crowley Redding, Jeremy?
Sure. Yeah, the cover will be seen in what I'm about to show, a little video I'm about to show. So let me get out of this for the moment. So just one thing I want to say before I play the video, let me get it ready to go here, is that I think there's for a long time been some confusion over Kate Moore's actual first name. For many years, we all thought it was Catherine Moore, but I'm not sure. I correct, maybe Eleanor Dwyer. I should have mentioned. I was remiss in not mentioning that Eleanor is here earlier. But Eleanor is a well-known lighthouse author and is on the board of directors of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. So Glad to see you here today, Eleanor, and also a resident of Connecticut. Eleanor, do you remember, was it research by Candace Clifford that found I think it was the death certificate that showed it was actually Kathleen Moore and not Catherine Moore, as we had thought?
Yes, I think that was Candace before she passed. She was always adding to her collection on women keepers. And I'm pretty sure she was the one who found that. Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think so. And I'll just mention again, Phil, you mentioned the book by Mary Louise and Candace Clifford, Women Who Kept the Lights. It's a classic. And I think that was largely that book that first brought Kate's story to the attention of a lot of people. I don't think she was well known.
If I can interject, Jeremy, I actually removed the slide from this presentation, but there was a what would you call the Ruin Walker was a shipyard, chandlery that sold, and they supplied all the mariners with paint and the supplies for the boats, and we came across the logbook from that business. And the logbook and actually had Catherine Moore was the signature in that book. And so that threw us off. So I took that slide up at the bottom. The end of this story is I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but
yeah.
Well,
she's Kate Moore. So
yeah, that's what we put on our memorial. We figured we were safe with Kate. The Coast Guard chose Kathleen.
Just one little thing to interject. Her middle name was Andre. And nobody ever knew what Andre was, but evidently her ancestor was aide de camp to George Washington. And when Major John Andre was captured, when he was trying to turn West Point over to Benedict Arnold, her ancestor was the guard outside his cell or his tent before he was hung. And he was such a gentleman that when the word came down, well, we're going to name one of our kids after John Andre. That's where the Andre comes from, which is kind of just adds to the whole Kate Moore thing,
Yeah. Well, you've said a few things today that I wasn't aware of, some details about her life. So it's all pieces of the puzzle, all very interesting. So shall we go ahead with the video here, I think, at this point? Yeah. So I'm going to play about a 9-minute video. A couple of years ago, I think it was actually last year, I interviewed Anna Crowley Redding from my podcast, and she wanted to be here today. She wasn't able to, she had a prior commitment, so she's not here with us. But I'm going to play some clips I edited together from the interview with her, what I think are some of the most pertinent parts of that interview. So it kind of speaks for itself, I think. So let me go ahead and play that.
I saw this news flash that the U.S. Coast Guard had named a fast response Coast Guard cutter after Kate Moore, and that she had been a lighthouse keeper who started keeping the lighthouse at age 12 in the 1800s. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if I had known this story when I was 12 years old, what possibilities might I have imagined for myself as a girl, as a woman? And so that's really what sort of drew me in. Number one, there isn't a standalone book just for her until now. And to me, it was the age at which she took over. And when I went to inspect her lighthouse journal, which is now in the sort of protected history collection of the Bridgeport Library, what was fascinating about reading her words is how matter-of-fact she was. So this log includes writings from keepers who came after her as well. And the other keepers are so dramatic. And Kate is, just the facts, man. Throughout the thing. And to me, that said a lot about her level of dedication, commitment, how serious she was as a person, how serious that job was. and how courageous she was.
Yeah.
She stayed absolutely focused on the task at hand. So I think all of that. And then also, when I was down there doing research, I learned that, and this was in 2014, the summer of 2014, when I really started going down this road. And so I went to Black Rock and Fairweather, and that's when I learned that the children who had survived the Sandy Hook shooting had adopted her lighthouse as part of their healing. And because one of their friends who was slain, Ben Wheeler, loved lighthouses. And so they took care of Kate Moore's lighthouse because they were working under the slogan, "Helping is healing," which I thought was amazing. And so I felt like I eventually went to their school and worked with them on how to research documents and how to understand the story, and how inspiring it is to see other people who have faced difficult things, and to draw our courage from other people's examples. And there were so many highs and lows in actually writing this book, but I kept coming back to that. I want to make good on that promise to those kids, that I will deliver a book about their hero. And so that was really important to me. So I did a lot of research looking at the national records as well. So things like, these old maps, so that I could look and see, because there are a couple of, I think, a couple of historic articles about her, and some of them are like outrageous, and you can't even believe it's true. And so I wanted to look at as much primary source information as possible to basically prove or disprove these articles. And really the only thing that one of them got wrong was her age. She was not like 300 years old.
Yeah, I've tried to figure that out. I think if the article you're talking about, if it was correct, she would have been something like 108 at the time of the article. Yeah.
So eventually I found her obituary and her last will and testament. So figured out that she lived to age 86. So that helped. And so I was really analyzing through Ancestry, through the online resource, all of the census records where she shows up and where her parents show up, and then looking at the payroll, the congressional records, to see what she was paid and when she finally received checks in her own name, which is in her 50s. So it was just, grasping at every shred of paper that you could find to try to piece together her story and her life. So it was a bit of oftentimes I felt like a private detective digging through all of this information. And there was in one of the articles, it said that she had, I think it was a Rembrandt in her living room. And so I was able to find the painting, which is in Europe, and to call them and find, did she in fact, and she did not. It was a copy, which was quite common. But just chasing all of that down was actually a very enjoyable process.
Yeah.
It's for young readers. And so I want them to connect to her in such a visceral way. And so really, and this was interesting because in writing this story, it's so fascinating that she was a lighthouse keeper. It's so fascinating that she's living out on this island. Like, there were so many things that are fascinating about her. And so it took a long time for me to arrive at the heart of this story. And the heart of this story really is that at a time when women were expected to be seen sometimes and almost never heard, that she was doing something so heroic in spite of that, while wearing pants, by the way. And that's the part that I want the young readers to take from this is, yes, there were these limitations and there were these expectations of who she would be because she was a girl, but she did what she wanted to do, what she had to do, what she was compelled to do anyway.
Mhm.
And that's really the message that I want them to take from her life, is having that kind of courage. I've been a big Emily fan for a long time. Her work is incredible, and for anyone who isn't familiar with it, the layering, the texture, the color, it's bright. It's a little bit of it has the sort of whimsy of Impressionism, but the vibrancy of Matisse, and I just am crazy about her work. I really am.
Yeah. I let me hold it over here. I really love the cover. I mean, I love the illustrations in general, but I think the cover is kind of a masterpiece. I really do. It's
I
just,
think so too. And it's she that's hand lettering that she did. So
Yeah.
that's a font of her invention, and it's so cool.
Yeah.
I love them. I really do. And I love the stories they inspire, and the stories that, the true stories that have happened there. I just love them. I felt connected to her throughout the whole process. And so it was kind of like having her live with you. And trying to listen to her tell me what happened. And that was a sort of a cool feeling. I encourage people to get the book, and I hope that they and their young readers will be inspired. I think Kate Moore was just an unbelievable person, and it's very difficult to look back in history and write stories about women, because the historical record is just not focused on them. And so it's been really thrilling to sort of add her story back to the record.
Yeah. So do we want to get back into the PowerPoint at this point? I don't know if you have any comments about.
Just a quick comment. Yeah, when we were planning the Kate Moore Memorial in 2014, I guess, Anna showed up, and I'm not even sure how that happened, but we were at a meeting at Captain's Cove. And by the way, the same committee that planned the Kate Moore Memorial is essentially the same committee that is planning the bicentennial events for this one, of which today is a part. So shout out to them, because a lot of them have been around for the better part of 10 years now, working on a variety of initiatives. But anyway, Anna Redding just showed up with this book idea. So I, add that to the coincidence that the Coast Guard was planning on building a ship and naming it after her, which we didn't know. They were planning on putting a grave marker at her gravesite, which we came to learn, and that Leanna was writing this book, which which we didn't know. So it was really this kind of confluence of all these events that just happened, and we'll never know exactly why. But the net result was good. So yes, let's go back to because we're just at the end of this now. And the Ben's Lighthouse group I did not include in this presentation, but since Anna mentioned them, they came down for about 6 years or so. They got a hold of us, and I went up there and met with them, and the kids came down and worked out on the lighthouse every year. And we do a little, I give them a little talk while we were out there, a little history, and then they worked. And then they came back, and Bruce had them back at Captain's Cove, and we did a little more talk about Black Rock history, and then had them, and they had lunch. But it was quite a nice relationship. And then COVID hit. We haven't reestablished that, but we still may. But they're a really good group of people. The mom and dad of Ben Wheeler, Ben, one of the children that was killed that day, were the founders of this foundation. So it was great to work with them. So on to the present, the future, and the preservation. And I got this from New England's foremost lighthouse historian. So I stole this quote. And it's, for better or worse, with automation, the lighthouse keeper's life has been relegated to the past in most of the world. So with the passing of the age of the traditional keeper, a new form of keeper has evolved, and that is the historic preservationist. Many of whom are with us there, part of this preservation work. So we'll just go through kind of what we've done in the most recent years with the lighthouse, and then what the future looks like. This is the lighthouse before the restoration of the Black Rock Community Council in 1998. And the Black Rock Community Council, by the way, is the organization that oversees the history program, and they've done a whole lot of good work since the 70s in Black Rock. So they oversaw this, and that's what it looked like. Not a very good visual. And that's what it looked like after the restoration. So you can see that a lot of the damage that this lighthouse incurs, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, is man-made damage. It's not nature. Nature plays a big role, but human nature is as big a threat as Mother Nature. So we'll continue on. The current lighting is solar. It's not meant it was decommissioned in 33, so it's not a maritime guide anymore. So we use what's called landmark lighting, which is lighting that basically is positioned downward. So it illuminates the monument at night, the structure at night, but it does not go out toward the water, the lighting. It goes straight down. But it looks terrific at night with once this lighting was installed. And then over the years, we've been entrusted with, when we've taken upon ourselves the responsibility of maintaining this system. And on the left, you've got some poor teenagers, one of whom is my son, lugging a ladder across that breakwater to get out there. And then these people who have much more courage than me go up the ladder and get up and onto the top of the lighthouse. So if we continue, and this is just a breakdown of the system that's inside the lantern room from a couple of years ago in the upper left, the solar panel in the upper right. You can see the lights in the lower right corner that shines down. Those are LED lights now, so they're quite bright. Go ahead. And then the Mother Nature and human nature story, the threats to the lighthouse. And you know, the Mother Nature is definitely, that affects every lighthouse, but the human nature, I think, I don't want to say it's unique to ours, but there aren't that many lighthouses that face this challenge. You can see on the left, the base of the lighthouse, how it had degraded after Sandy. The riprap that protects the base from the high tide and from water during storms was basically, to the point where it no longer existed on that one side. On the right, that's the base that was exposed of the oil house that we showed you at the very beginning of this presentation. We did not know that was underground, but the extent of Sandy was so great that it pushed all the surface sand off of that and exposed the base of that oil house for the first time since they knocked it down in the 60s or 70s. So then we went on, we had the damage to the inside, and then we learned that there was $8 million in federal disaster relief funding from the Park Service to provide emergency repairs to historic and archaeological resources in Connecticut, including Fairfield, needed as a result of the damage caused by the storm. So once I saw that, I got a hold of the mayor's office, and we were able to get the city to work on a grant, and they got a grant, which was terrific work on their part, and they got almost $450,000 to restore the base. It was a huge win for us because if you don't restore the base, the lighthouse doesn't stay. So on the left, you see the base before Sandy, after Sandy, where it had been completely marginalized on that one side. And then after the base restoration, and you can see the difference where that red arrow is pointing. So it was quite impactful, Sandy, and the restoration of that base was key to the survival of this lighthouse. So today it's obviously going to continue to be threatened in its current position. I don't anticipate, certainly not in my lifetime, that lighthouse being moved, but at least the base has been restored so that we have a lot more protection from the water. And there you see a good shot of the new base, the new riprap. So it's completely rebuilt. Almost $450,000 to do that, thanks to the grant that was awarded to the city of Bridgeport. And then we learned in 2018, the grant got extended. And so suddenly we have scaffolding around the lighthouse. The city was even unaware that the state had done this, but the funding came down through our state historic preservation office in the state of Connecticut. And unbeknownst to me, or even the city at the time, they had decided they were going to extend that initial grant. I guess they had some money left over, and they were now going to do the whole tower. Terrific news for us because it had really degraded in the time since it had been restored in the 90s.
Sorry, I did that
And
by accident.
That's okay. No, you can go on. You can keep moving. And so there it is. And just before the restoration in 2018, not as bad as 1998, but not good. Some of that, again, a lot of that is Mother Nature, but all the stuff on the bottom is human nature. And then we can go on to see what it looks like after the restoration. I don't know how that got there, but that's the lantern railing. A part I'm not sure where I kept it, but we have a lot of pictures of the actual restoration during this time. But we should have a picture of the. Oh, maybe I messed up there, but we'll get there. And this is a close up of the core build section just below the base, and that's brick, and it completely deteriorated. The base of the lantern itself. And then the restoration. Before and after. Go ahead, Jeremy. And then there's the lantern before and after. Our organization paid for the restoration. There's your before and after shot. So you can see what a difference it made. Now, one last problem we had that was Mother Nature. Well, let's do this. Okay, here's the door immediately after restoration. February of 2017. That's got to be wrong. And then look at it a couple months later. I think that we mean 2018 there.
Well, let's see, February 2017.
Yeah,
and
no,
this-
I think I put the wrong dates. But anyway, it's the same part of because the restoration took place in 2018.
Mhm.
And that's the door after they shortly after they restarted. And we'll show you now what the door looks like today. And again, that's human nature, not Mother Nature. And then if you go one more slide. And look at the inside. Something like not as bad as what you showed, but not great.
Yeah.
All right, so the Osprey deterrent system.
Could I interject
have-
something, Phil? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yes, we talked about the door. I was just remembering that back in the 90s, that earlier restoration, I was talking to the people involved at the time. I was writing an article about it, and I remember them saying that across from the island at their homes, that one night they heard these booms, and it was somebody trying to break in the door with a sledgehammer. Do you know? Do you know if you've heard that story?
And I haven't, but they used some. This was a very heavy door that was installed most recently, and the lock was a heavy duty lock. So they spent a considerable amount of time and effort breaking through to open up that lighthouse. I know that one of these groups has these religious ceremonies out there, which you kind of get a sense of by that's the inside window of the lighthouse, and they set up these little shrines, and so it gains some level of religious importance, I think, to a group around here, and that might have been their impetus for doing such a destructive thing. But it wasn't easy to break in, but I don't know when we're going to get that fixed now. And we had an osprey nest on top of the lighthouse, so we went through this long period of trying to figure out how to keep the osprey off the lighthouse. As far as I know, the lighthouse is the only lighthouse in existence that has this problem, but I'm sure I'm wrong about that. I just don't know of another lighthouse. And when we got the company to develop this deterrent system, they told us up front, we never did a lighthouse. We've never heard of a lighthouse with an osprey problem. We've done light towers, we've done church steeples, but we've never done a lighthouse. So this is what they proposed, and then it went back and forth with the city, with me, with the Black Rock Community Council, with the state, and we finally decided on this, much to my chagrin. But anyway, it's wire and netting that they put on top of the lighthouse to prevent them from nesting. And then we go to how the osprey responded to this. And they loved it. They had now a nice base to put their twigs and sticks and everything else, that gets intertwined. And now that osprey nest is as big and as big as it was before it was removed and the system was put in, and it gets bigger every year, which is the nature of osprey nesting. It's a nice little natural kind of, thing, but the bottom line is it does a lot of damage to the lighthouse because it brings with it moisture and vegetation, and suddenly you have growth inside that lantern, and all that stuff starts to degrade the base that the lantern sits on, and even the corbelled section and the brownstone section below. So it's not a good situation, but the osprey didn't show. In fact, I think they liked what we had done. So that's where we are today with that particular issue. And then next, and you can see the roots when the osprey nest was there, it kind of takes hold in the base and starts to grow, and they get bigger and they expand and they form cracks in the base, and you get the story. When we first went up there at this last restoration, that lantern room looked like a small jungle. It had so much vegetation in it. And it's probably getting to be that way now. So there it is, our osprey nest. And that's the view from the top, which I just thought was a nice view to include in this presentation. The next slide is we'd be remiss if we didn't make a pitch for our preservation fund. But I'm sure most of the people watching are already involved in preservation funds. But if you feel so inclined, it's www.blackrock375.org, and you can just hit Lighthouse Preservation Fund, and we'll take any donation. The city owns this lighthouse. They're not very good custodians of this structure, and so when we can get them to act, they do. But we've done. We've spent $15,000 alone on redoing the lantern during the last restoration. So our preservation fund right now is down to about $30. So we're using this bicentennial to replenish that fund. So whatever you could provide, if you so choose, would be greatly appreciated. And Bruce, unless you have something more, Jeremy, I think that's the end of the presentation on our end.
Okay. All right. That was great. It was tremendous. And I haven't been able to see the chat in a while, so I'll have to look at that and see if we have some questions. I was going to mention, you were saying you didn't know of another lighthouse that has an osprey problem. I know of one other. It's not quite the same. There's no nest on top of it. Eleanor, you might know that Huntington Harbor Lighthouse on the other side of Long Island Sound in New York has an
Dutch Island.
Dutch
If
has
they
Dutch
don't have a nest,
yeah.
it doesn't count.
What's that?
They don't have a nest, it doesn't count.
Oh, they have nests at
Yeah.
Huntington Harbor.
On top?
I was just there. No, not on the top, off to the side on the deck where the lighthouse is. Aren't on
okay.
well, they put posts out so they would the osprey would put their nest there. So they're a little bit away from the lighthouse. But when I was there with the group in May, a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour, the osprey were not happy with a big group of people being so close to their nests, and they were I thought they were going to dive bomb us. They were flying around.
No, they get very aggressive.
Yeah. But
That was
yeah.
That was one of the ideas to put a post up, but they went with the net at Black Rock.
Right. So I'll just mention on that subject too, we at Portsmouth Harbor Light, that's 10 minutes from where I'm sitting here in New Hampshire, we had a problem with cliff swallows building these mud nests up underneath the ironwork, the lantern deck underneath there. So they made a mess all over the lighthouse for the first few years I was involved there. So when we had it painted in 2009, we had the contractor put netting under the ironwork, like tight netting. It's kind of hard to see unless you're looking for it. So it's not as obvious as what was done at Fairweather. But anyway, so that solved the problem there. But they're much smaller birds to deal with. So we can take questions at this point. I'm going to scour the chat for questions, but people, if you all, oops, somebody's waiting in the waiting room. They're a little late, but they're here in time for the Q&A. So if anybody wants to ask a question verbally, you see on your Zoom control, well, I'm gonna look in the chat first, and then I'll get to that. So let's look in the chat, see if there are any questions. Can anyone drive out to the beach area or only local residents? Is there a charge? You guys want to take that?
Oh, the answer to that question is there is no charge after Labor Day and before Memorial Day. But during the season, if you're not from the city, if you're not resident, there is a charge, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. I don't think it's.
Yeah, it's not one of the
10 or
higher ones.
15 or
around
something.
here. It was 15 the last I remember. It
Yeah.
was $15 for the day, as Phil said, during the summer.
If you're going to go to the lighthouse, if you're going to visit, that's the intent of that question. Don't go during the summer anyway, because it is infested with all kinds of black flies and mosquitoes, and you'll get attacked. Your best time to go is after Labor Day. Probably even now would not be a good time when it starts to cool down by the end of September, October. That's the perfect time to visit, or in the spring.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would also tell you that if you're going to go there, that walk out has become more and more treacherous with every storm that comes through. So there are areas of that breakwater where you think you're actually doing rock climbing, and you got to step way down, and then you got to get way back up. So if you have, just be prepared with good footwear, and it's going to be a very challenging walk.
Yeah, there were, as Phil said, the flies and mosquitoes, even during the daytime. A movie was shot out there about 10, 15 years ago with Ryan Gosling. I forgot the name of the movie, but we helped them get the gear out and so on. They almost shut the production down because it was the flies were so bad
It's
in the
awful.
daytime, not like normally in the evening,
Very bad.
so.
Yeah.
So don't pay and don't go. Go during the off season.
Yeah. First time I went out there, when I took those pictures I showed earlier, it was the middle of summer. I don't remember exactly when it was, but yeah, I can verify what you were just saying. It was brutal. I don't see any other questions in the chat. There's a lot of people saying it was a really good presentation and thanking you guys. So I'll just give people a last chance. If you have any questions you want to ask either in the chat, or if you want to verbally ask a question, you can, on the Zoom controls, you can click reactions and then click raise hand, and I'll see that you have your hand raised and I can call on you. Eleanor, did you have something I see you're unmuted. I don't know if you had a question or comment.
Well, I wanted to mention that we have international guests today. Keith Morton is here from the Keith, tell me, what's the name of the group? The Lighthouse Keepers. I'm a member and I forget their name.
The ALK?
Yes,
The
yes.
Association of Lighthouse Keepers. Oh, there's Keith. Yeah, Keith is a regular attendee of these events. We
That's
appreciate it, Keith.
wonderful.
I know it's 10:30 in England right now, something like that.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is 10:30. Yes, I had to work it all out. What time I had to be here so I could join the meeting. Yeah.
Well,
great,
thank you for being here, Keith. Yeah, the ALK, the Association of Lighthouse Keepers, is a great organization, and
Yeah.
I've interviewed a few people involved with that, including Neil Hargreaves. I believe he's the
Yep.
current president, and Ian Duff, who I think is the vice president in Scotland. He's a
Oh,
great guy. Yeah, so tremendous group. Anything else, Eleanor, or anybody else? Oh, here's a question. Are there, my voice is echoing back at me. I don't know if everybody's hearing that. I'm not sure why that's happening, but anyway, is everybody hearing that echo? Okay, now it seems to have stopped. Are there pawpaw trees on the island? The question, pawpaw trees. I'm not even sure what those are.
I saw that from Maxine. I saw that pop up. I don't know what a pawpaw. I know there are a lampas trees out there, which
She planted Kate Moore.
yeah, she planted
I
back.
think it's a trick question. That's my neighbor that she's trying to trip us up. I don't know what a pawpaw tree is.
I have no idea. My wife's at work right now. She knows trees. So she's, what
Oh,
repair?
wait.
Somebody,
Okay.
oh, that's also Maxine. What repairs still need to be done? I'm sure there's always something. You're never done with these things.
Well, I mean, I showed the picture of the current state of the door, and I really don't know where to go with that, because I don't know what kind of door we could put there that they're not gonna bust open. And then we have a fair amount of graffiti right now that's found its way to the base of the lighthouse that needs to be addressed. There are some people going out this fall to replace some of the LED lights, so that's an immediate repair. That will probably cost us $1,000 or so. I'm not sure the exact cost, but we just replaced the battery last year. That's an ongoing thing, the solar lighting system. I would like to get with the city and really seal the base of that lighthouse so that there's an anti-graffiti sealant that's going to work, that will hopefully keep it better shape in the years ahead. And that's all dependent upon how much money we raise through this preservation initiative.
Mm-hmm.
There's another long-term possible solution to cutting down on the graffiti and so on, and the physical damage, things like the door and so on. So the breakwater that leads to the into Seaside Park obviously protects the harbor from waves. That's why it's there in the first place. Check the boats and so on that are moored there. But there's been a suggestion that a portion of the breakwater be removed, maybe 15 or 20 feet, which would prevent people from walking out to the light, which would make it kind of a natural preserve, not only for the light, but for the, vegetation and so on the island. So that's might be a long-term solution to at least the vandalism problem.
Mother Nature may make that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way it's already.
It's really marginalized in some sections.
We're still on the pawpaw thread here, but Maxine said Charles Brilvich said there were pawpaw trees, but then somebody else said there are persimmon trees. This is Kate Spain said there are persimmon trees or were out there according to Charles Brilvich.
Well, whatever Charles said is true. So I will say it was the question, are there pawpaw trees?
Yeah, that was the original
And
question.
if Charles said there were, I guess the answer to the question is yes.
Charles said there were persimmon trees. I think.
Charles knew every tree by their name.
Maybe both. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know the name Charles, but remind me who he is.
He was a former
was.
city historian.
Okay,
He's
right.
helping
Okay.
out on this bicentennial initiative
Mhm.
with some research work, and he's up in New York State now, but he's a tremendous asset and resource for any local history. And he was out at that island. Like I mean, I'm kind of kidding saying he knew every tree by its first name, but he knew every single one. He was out there a lot when he
Yeah.
lived in Bridgeport. So
Yeah. Somebody asked, can you put cameras? I think she probably means like a webcam.
there's no electricity out there. I suppose they have solar powered cameras or battery operated cameras. Problem with that is you typically won't get any real identity of the person. I mean, you're going to have to put them up high, and they will become targets just like the solar panels are targets. And they'll figure out a way to destroy them at some point. But yeah, we've thought about that.
Yeah.
We really can't put fencing around it for the obvious reason. It'd be very difficult to do on that surface with the riprap and the water and everything else.
Mhm.
So that issue, I think the best is to try to seal it the best we can to prevent at least this graffiti from continuing.
Yeah. I'm echoing again. I'm hearing a really loud echo. Anyway, is there a camera anywhere on shore, like security camera pointing at it, that gives any kind of decent view?
No, I mean, no. I've got some people with drones that are willing to, attack them with the drone. But that's a lot, that's it's gotta be at the right time. I'm kidding. But no, the best we can do is we send drones over now and then, and we but we don't have cameras, and I don't know that we're going to be able to put cameras out there. I don't know if that's realistic.
Yeah. Maxine just said, just bought Courage Like Kate on Thrift Books with several exclamation points. So congratulations. I love it. I actually collect Lighthouse children's books, and it's one of my favorites.
Well, if there's anyone still from Black Rock on this, Courage Like Kate is on our website. If you want to buy a book from the Black Rock Community Council, just go to that 375.org website and make the purchase, and we'll get the book to you.
There you go. The money will go to better use than if you buy it from Amazon or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we'll give people another moment here if there are any last minute questions, either via chat or if you want to virtually raise your hands. But otherwise, I think we'll kind of wind down for the day here today. I want to mention that our next planned Zoom event will be on September 30th, 3 weeks from today, and the guest will be Teresa Levitt, I'm sure a lot of you know she's the author of A Short Bright Flash, is one of the great lighthouse books ever, about the French scientist Augustin Fresnel and his important invention of the Fresnel lens. And Short Bright Flash refers to both the lens itself and his life, because he only lived to be 30, but was quite an amazing person. So again, that'll be September 30th. Watch for the announcement on that. And I'll give Eleanor, as a representative of the U.S. Lighthouse Society, anything more you'd like to add before we call it a day for today?
Only that there's a lot of new stuff on our website, uslhs.org. And, keep checking and see what's there. There's always stuff being uploaded.
Yeah, and there's going to be a new version of the website soon. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that publicly yet, but it's pretty exciting. I'm not sure I can give a date.
On me.
Okay, well, it's happening soon. The whole new revamped website, which I think is fantastic. It's going to be much more streamlined, still tremendous content, but more streamlined and more user friendly than it's been. So again, thank you.
One last thing. Someone just asked what the website was to make a donation to the lighthouse. My daughter was good enough to put the actual website. I don't know if everyone saw it, but it's the listener wanted you to put the website back on the screen, but it's really easy. It's www.blackrock375.org.
Yeah.
So it was blackrock375.org. I think it was Gary Martin that asked, because he just said thank you very much.
I can put it on the screen. I'll do that for a moment.
We'll have pictures on that website of the fireworks over the lighthouse after next weekend.
There you see, blackrock375.org.
That's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Jeremy.
Phil and Bruce.
Thanks,
Somebody
Jeremy.
said something. Does somebody have a question, or is that just a thank you? I'm not sure. Somebody said Jeremy.
That was just a thank you, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you, Gary. All right. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Phil and Bruce. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And anything that promotes such a historic lighthouse and interesting personality like Kate Moore is a great thing. So thank you all so much. I'll see you again soon, and hope you can listen to the podcast again, which is Lighthearted, 2 words, Light Space Hearted. Every Sunday I post new episodes. And if there's anybody here who took part in our recent National Lighthouse Day dance contest, thank you for that. And if you haven't seen the entries, we got some great entries. Go on the USLHS YouTube channel or under What's New on the uslhs.org, and you can see the winning videos. And I just think they were so much fun. So you don't want to miss that. So again, thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon. And keep a good light. Take care, everyone. And this will be posted within a couple of days if you want to see it again. So thank you all.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy. Take care.